Hi, this is Ali and we are learning Windows System Security course. Today's session is all about restricting privileged accounts. We start from Windows Privileged Account. What is privileged account, its type and how to harden it? Let's start. Why do we need security? Well, I think it's pretty common sense. Your privileged account management is going to be critical to your data security and protecting that data. The thing is that the bad guys want to get their hands on the good stuff, and credentials, especially privileged credentials, is going to give them that access that they're looking for. So in the wrong hands, those privileged accounts represent the biggest threat to your Windows 10. Because these accounts can breach your personal data, people who have them can use them. Complete unauthorized transactions, then cause denial of service attacks and hide activity by the leading audit data. So there are 7 types of privileged accounts that you have with Windows. And number 1, I want to talk about your local administrative account, and those are those non-personal accounts which provide you administrative access to your local host that you have. So those local admin accounts are routinely used by our IT staff. They usually perform their maintenance on workstations and the servers and the network devices and databases and mainframes, and all the other stuff you have in your organization. And often what happens is that they have the same password across your entire platform, or your entire organization. And we do this because it makes it easier for us to use. But here's a problem: share password across those thousands of hosts makes for a soft target that advanced threats routinely want to try to exploit. The second type is the privileged user accounts. Now those are the named credentials which have been granted administrative privileges on one or more your systems. And this is typically one of our most common forms of privileged accounts that we have where we grant access on our enterprise network. And what they do is, they allow users to have administrative rights on, for example, their local desktops or across the systems that they have the responsibility of managing, and often these accounts have unique and complex passwords. So what do we do usually? What unique and complex passwords? Sometimes we write them down, so we can remember all more, have a list of them, whatever it may be. But the power that these will across those managed systems that we have make it necessary for us to continually monitor use of them and also control those passwords. The third one you see there is domain administrative accounts. Now they have privileged administrative access across all your workstations and your servers within your domain. So while these accounts may be few in number, what happens is that they provide the most extensive and the most robust access across your network. If somebody gets complete control over this, complete control over all the domain controllers and the ability to modify the membership of every administrator account you have within your system, that compromise of those credentials is often going to be the worst case scenario that we can have in our organization. The next one is the emergency accounts. So we use those underprivileged. Well, we take improves users, and we give these administrative light rights or access so they can secure our systems in case there's an emergency. The next one is service account. So these can be privileged local or domain accounts that are used by an application or some type of service to interact with our operating system. So what happens here is that in some cases those service accounts have domain administrator privileges, depending on what the requirements are for the application that I'm using them for. So local service accounts can interact with a variety of my different Windows components, and that's going to make coordinating password changes for those accounts pretty difficult. The next one is Active Directory. You all heard of Active Directory or your domain service accounts, and password changes can be even more challenging with these. That because they require coordination across multiple systems. So this challenge often leads to us having a common practice of really changing those service account passwords. And that's going to represent a significant risk across our entire Windows 10. And the last one is application accounts. Those are accounts used by our applications to access our databases, run batch jobs, or scripts, or provide access to other applications that we're working with. And these privileged accounts are usually going to have broad access to some of the underlying company information we might have. So we take those passwords for these accounts. Sometimes we embed those and store those in unencrypted text files. And that's a vulnerability that can be replicated across all our servers to provide greater fault tolerance for the applications that we have. Now this vulnerability though is going to represent a significant risk to us because the applications often are gonna host the exact data that the APTs are looking for. When I say APTs, it means some advanced persistent threat which hackers like that this is what they're looking for. So what's the problem with the Windows accounts? In a lot of larger organizations there are 3 or 4 times as many privileged accounts as there are users. That's a lot of counts. Especially we have a lot of users, so that a privileged account is how administrators are gonna log on to servers. That's how they gonna get to the switches, the firewalls, the routers, the database servers, all those things. And in the worst case, using default passwords are gonna be there. They're never gonna be revoked. The username, I know you guys say I don't do this, but usually the username is admin, or it might even be a blank password that you can easily get into. Now what organizations have done over the years is that they've learned to say disabled to default passwords. But often that default is replaced with a single login, and that's shared by anybody who needs to get on that machine. Especially if it's our Windows server and we have different system administrators, so others and other companies do what they've done. They've graduated the separate credentials for each administrator. But then you know what they do. They don't manage them, they don't go back and look at or audit it, so when an employee or contractor leaves, their credentials are never erased, they're still sitting out there. And then another issue we have is with the machines that have to talk to each other. And that code, but the password code is hardwired with usernames and passwords that are hard to change. Again we have a problem, especially we start hardwiring our passwords into machines. And one of the worst examples I've seen is that Microsoft still allows an attacker who has admin rights on one machine to log into any other machine on the network just using those store hashes and credentials. We'll get to that. What's the problem with accounts? Also, privileged access management for Windows. Is it difficult with the native capabilities that come into it? Things like Active Directory, authentication policies, credential guards, multi-factor authentication. So let's talk a little bit about privilege. What is privilege? Basically it's the authority to make administrative changes to a network or to a computer. Privileged is a noun that refers to the concept of having an increased level of access and permissions on that network. Actually, using the word privilege is an adjective, and what that does is describe things with privilege. Like our privilege account, or a privileged user, or a privilege identity, or something like that. So when somebody tells you that an account has privilege, what they mean is that it has a higher level of access than a standard user account. Now what is privilege management? Privilege management refers to as the process of managing who or what has privileges on your network. Who are Windows super users? Who's a Windows super user? I mean, we talk about Unix and Linux and things like that. We kind of know that there's a super user account and things like that. But where is it and what is it in a Windows account? So if you're the only user on your Windows machine, then you're the administrator of that machine. But with the Windows operating system there are so many little things that's hidden away. And that super administrator account is one of those things is hidden away. Mostly students probably don't even know about that. So if you're wondering, that super administrator account is different from your current regular administrator account, and it gives you a lot more permissions to change things in your operating system. Now of course Windows doesn't call this a super account, but it definitely gives you some extra privileges over the normal administrator account that you might have access to and that you might be used to. So indeed, just like Unix and Linux, we do have the ability to be a super user, and I think folks who control Direct Access Directory, you can consider those folks super users as well. Now what least privilege is? Basically, mismanaged privileges pose a devastating risk of your organization, includes loss of money, reputation, and things like that. To reduce the risk around shared and privileged account, there first and foremost need to be some type of accountability. We need to hold people accountable for their actions. We can do this by restricting access. Restricting access to mission-critical servers do not mean that the system administrator is gonna be diminishing their duties. They won't be able to perform their duties. It just means that now we're getting that accountability I said that we need, and that's the whole purpose of it. You'd only need so much to do your job, and to be honest with you, if I'm gonna sit at, man, I really don't want access to everything. I don't want to make a mistake, and I want to be held accountable for it later. So this is what that least privilege is all about. Now let's look at securing Windows privileged account. Manual protective management and monitoring those privileged accounts can be very tedious. It could be time consuming, it can be a drain on your resources, and it can be very inefficient. Let's take a look. I just want to throw this cartoon up. What is like for no privilege? And what is like for private? You gotta have that, and that intermediary, that go between. You got to prove to me who you are before I give you access. But let's look at the tools and things like that that's out there that we can use to do this job. Now PAM or PAM. When using PAM here in this webinar, but PAM and all the other acronyms that's out there related to PAM is about one thing, and that's really about the software systems that we have to use to manage and secure our sensitive digital data. And those terms are about three things. It's about safeguarding data by protected who has access to your system, how they can get to the server in the first place, and what they're allowed to do once they are on your sensitive information systems. We look our privileged accounts, those products out there using control access to accounts using in two different ways. Usually the first mechanism that we have forces the administrator or some type of program to check out the account password and make sure that person is authorized to be on that account. The second mechanism changes the account's password frequently on the target platform. These products also provide some workflow capabilities for approval and follow-up after giving emergency access to a privileged account. Privileged account management tools provide two password checkout methods, maybe more, that we can use. Usually have an interactive one and a programmatic one. And in that interactive checkout method, the system administrator use that privileged account to access the target platforms. And use it, that system administrator authenticated that privileged account management product will do some type of wild web browser session or something like that. And once they authenticate, that system administrator retrieves that account password. And then they use that password to interact with the Windows terminal services or secure shell until now whatever it is they're using. Password change frequency is another thing we can throw out, so that's important. So when I control access by routinely changing those account passwords on that target platform. Those are privileged account management products provided us with options for how we can control the password change frequency. Daily, weekly or monthly, whatever we want it to be. It can also allow us to have privileged sign-on or privilege on single sign-on. So the system admin can access the target platform using some type of privileged account management product, workstation or client software. And then what's happening is that behind the scenes, that privileged account management software is gonna retrieve the password. It's gonna log the user onto the system, it's doing some type of session protocol, and then track what's happening on there so we know what's going on. And the last one is programmatic password caching. Now, what happens with is this: we use a highly distributed production environment like a large retail store, something like their corporation. They're gonna be at a disadvantage if the account management password cannot be retrieved, if they have some type of network issue. Best practices for managing Windows 10 privileged account. So number 1. Use automated tools. This is enable those inactive accounts. Number 2. Use multi-factor authentication for all your administrative access, include your domain administrative access. Number 3. Implement automated password verification and reconciliation to ensure that the passwords of record are current on all systems. 4th. Regularly again change and verify those hard-coded passwords that we have embedded in our applications. Number 5. Deploying solution that provides the ability to directly connect to a target system without displaying the password to the user. Number 6. Implement a gateway to eliminate privileged users directly accessing sensitive assets and IT infrastructure. Number 7. Implement a request workflow for credential access approval including dual controls and integration with help desk ticketing system. Number 8. Implement session recording for all privileged access. Next, number 9. Proactively detect malicious behavior. Last one I have is implement a focus auditing on the use of administrative privilege functions and monitor again for anomalous behavior. So log and all that user activity and generating alerts on unusual behavior is going to provide us again that additional information on our privileged account. Use access and use of those accounts so we integrate that with the security teams that can help them to dramatically reduce the speed of the reviews.